Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Brian, good afternoon. How are you?
Hi, Ger. How are you?
Good. Finally, these teams have been named. This game's obviously on Sunday, so we had to wait until today to get them. Keith Earls is in. He's on the wing replacing Jordan Larmour. And then there's two changes in the front row, Healy and Herring. Otherwise, it's exactly the same team that started the game against Italy. Are you in any way surprised that Jamison Gibson-Park kept his place?
Not really, to be honest with you. I thought, on second viewing in particular, I thought he did pretty well. I think he brings a good energy and tempo, plays fast. Even when he got turned over on the tap and go, that's the sort of stuff that we want in our game. We want the unscripted. We want to be encouraging play heads up, play what you see. If it feels as though it's on, don't wait a second because then it's not on anymore. Just tap and go with your gut, your instincts. That's why you've been selected. So I think we've come away from that. If you think about it, I was thinking about Conor Murray. His game seems to have changed quite a lot. When was the last time it felt like he took a quick tap penalty? It seems like ages ago when he was bringing that energy and always kept the opposition guessing. It always feels like it was a dummy tap and go, and then we'd kick to the corner or we'd relieve pressure rather than actually, let's take a few risks and see what comes of it. So Jamison Gibson-Park definitely, for me, deserves another opportunity. And because he's not as good a box kicker as Conor Murray, hopefully we'll do less of it.
The other thing that seems to have happened is that Conor Murray's actually got back to something akin to his best form over the last 5 or 6 months. I mean, I don't want to automatically draw a comparison with the fact that he now has genuine competition, but he does for the first time in the best part of nearly a decade have genuine competition, and his form has come back to something akin to what his best was. So in the long run, the right thing to do is to reward somebody who's in good form from a selector's point of view.
Yeah, it is the right thing to do, and I don't know if I would agree that he's quite back to that's his best form. If you think about the Conor Murray in the Lions Tour 2017 and around the Grand Slam year, I think that was another level again, even on what we've seen the last 6 months. But the last 3-4 months. But the last 3-4 months have been a huge improvement on his kind of lull. And post that injury, it clearly shook him up. It clearly took an awful lot out of him from a confidence point of view. When you're carrying those little niggles, it's impossible not to have it affect your game. You have to have incredible mental strength. And even subconsciously, it's working away at you. So when you're operating, at 75 or 80% and you're putting on a brave face, it gives the detractors easy scope to have a go at you, albeit you're the only one that knows how much you are struggling. So it's great to see him back playing well for Munster, and he's played better for Ireland. But I do believe that it's a close run thing now with him and Jamison Gibson-Park, and then it's brilliant to have the likes of Craig Casey playing well in Munster and coming on and playing well in his debut, albeit it was against Italy. So we want to squeeze as much pressure because ultimately there will be a time where there's a changing of the guard, and it's a matter for those younger players to expedite that process rather than wait another year or two to try and really force the coach's hands to make sure that they are the next generation to put the time and effort into, because they're going to be the ones holding the jersey down come World Cup time in 2 years' time.
It's not a million miles away. Slightly reverse situation with Healy and Herring getting the nod ahead of Kelleher and Kilcoyne. Is this just about keeping everybody on their toes and having a bit of depth there? Because it's hard to tell what is actually our first choice numbers 1 and 2 at the moment.
Well, I have to say I was a bit surprised at those two because of how well the other two lads played. I know that loose heads that Kilcoyne kind of went off probably a bit earlier than he would have hoped for, but I thought he was a real nuisance in the game. He showed an explosiveness even though he was kind of lower on his carries than other forwards. Scrummaged well, got a great penalty, and you could see how pumped he was. It just feels as though even though I think he's old, he might be older than Cian Healy, just felt as though there's an extra little energy to him. I'm not saying that Cian Healy is stale. He's played an enormous amount of rugby, and there's been such a focus and onus on him in recent years. But I don't know, sometimes players, even in their older years, need a cattle prod up their backside and need to be left out for a couple of games for them to raise their game back again. But you know what you'll get with Cian Healy. He's a very solid performer. Prone to the occasional handling error over the course of his career, but we'll forgive him that. But he's good at scrum time, hits his rucks. When he clears out a ruck, it stays cleared out and gets through amount of work as well for his 50-odd minutes. You'll see Kilcoyne coming on. You'll see Herring and Kelleher swapping at some point too, because it is a starter-finisher thing. But I thought Kelleher's ball carrying as well, and pretty good with his darts. But you would anticipate you'll get more stress on your line out against Scotland. Good operators in Cummins and Gray, and even their back rowers know what they're at on the defensive line outside of things. So maybe it's for those reasons that Herring is the one that's being picked to start the game.
It's also such a technical position in terms of how well you go at the line out that you've got to be careful with young players when they're coming through to give them the right amount of exposure in the right kind of sequence so that there's no horror show and there's no damage done at a psychological level. He's still very young.
And he's already had a little bit of a hiccup, hasn't he? He's had a couple of injuries, and then he was kind of, he was breaking into the international scene, and then it didn't quite transpire for him. And it felt when he broke on the scene that this guy was destined to be, the number one for a long time. But it wasn't as fluid and seamless a transition from club into international. And sometimes, like I said previously, sometimes those serve as just a sharpener for players to remind them it's Test match rugby isn't easy, and you're going to have knocks. How can you deal with them, and can you come back stronger and learn from those episodes? So I do feel as though Kelleher will ultimately be a long-term choice if you don't have the likes of Dan Sheehan coming behind him at Leinster, putting pressure on him in the next 2 or 3 years. But for now, it does look as though Kelleher is the obvious choice if he can just continue to be blooded, with 20-minute segments, and if he can play well in those, ultimately I do feel he'll become a starter.
I want to just hear this from Andy Farrell. This is him explaining why he's gone with Keith Earls over Jordan Larmour. Have a look at this.
His know-how, his organisation of the back line in all different aspects of play. His know-how, his organisation of the back line in all different aspects of play. He's certainly a leader in many regards of backfield play, edge defence play. He's great under the high ball. He's still as quick as ever and still as sharp as ever. And I think there's good competition with Jacob coming back as well. There's good competition that's happening there on the wing and at fullback.
And can I just ask you about that bench again? How excited are you about what a pretty dynamic bunch of players can do?
Yeah, it's more and more so these days. It's becoming a full squad game, and those guys will certainly make an impact. We're super excited about the bench coming on and making a difference. There's some of those guys that we're really disappointed not to make the starting side, but they'll add and make a difference to the performance. There's no doubt about that.
Basically, Andy Farrell loves Keith Earls there. That was like, I love Keith Earls, that's why I picked him. Yeah,
a bit of the old Jemba. It's so good they named him twice. He was kind of repeating himself there. I presume that was an error on our behalf. But sometimes coaches or sometimes players get into coaches' heads, and they've done something or they've helped them in the past, or they've won on special occasions, and they knit a tighter bond between themselves and the coach, and make it difficult when they're available for them to be dropped. Particularly if you don't have a howler, and if you haven't done anything wrong anytime you played in the international jersey, irrespective of your form at club, it's hard for them. They know that you deliver on the big stage, and that's why the likes of Peter O'Mahony has been picked for a number of years, because he's delivered on big games like the All Blacks. And Keith Earls is the same, played very well in that All Black game, and that you just reinforce the opinion that coaches have of you when you deliver at the toughest moments. I've always been a huge Keith Earls fan. I don't feel he's playing anywhere near the Keith Earls of a couple of years ago, and he was named Irish Player of the Year. He just looks a bit shorter on confidence, on understanding exactly what he's trying to do, on a bit of space as well. But yes, scoring that try the other day, those sort of things can be catalysts for improvement in form and just getting into the game a little bit more. It's a bit of a tough call on Jordan Larmour. You know, he didn't do a whole lot wrong. Even the first try, or the only Italian try, I didn't feel it was particularly his fault. I know Johnny Sexton was given out. That it was poor defence. If anything, it was probably Sexton's fault for racing up and leaving Furlong behind and creating a dog leg and allowing an offload from Garbisi. But I do think that Jordan Larmour, you know, is ultimately heir to the throne for the next World Cup. So I don't know when it's a very tight call why you're not putting the likes of him in there, or, you know, maybe it's a bit early for Jacob Stockdale. I don't know if he's shown enough in the last couple of weeks to catapult himself back into the team. But with Keith Earls, he's the best defensive winger. Particularly with Finn Russell's kicking game, I think he's able to read it a little bit better, because Ireland play their wings quite high, but not the same, you know, level of highness of some of the provincial teams. I think Keith Earls has an ability to be able to read on the pass when the outside half throws it, but also read an ability and watch body shapes to understand when the ball is going to be kicked in behind them too. So with the weather conditions predicted to be as poor as they're going to be, I can understand why Keith Earls might have been picked in there. Very good under the high ball too. So there's not much between the two lads, but tough one for Jordan Larmour to stomach.
Can I ask you about that then? That is like an interesting dynamic where you're saying, you know, if ultimately it's going to be Larmour for the next World Cup, should we accelerate that process? If you're in the team, if you're teammates and you're watching that, so say you're 13 and you're watching what's going on in the wing and one of them is slightly ahead of the other one in training, is that what you want the team to be picked on? Or are you thinking long term, look, if we're going to get past the bloody quarterfinals, what are you thinking?
Yeah, you're thinking short term. You're not, and also, you know, you're thinking, of course, who you think is the better, but then ultimately, once you're selected, and it's a close run thing, which it is between Jordan Larmour and Keith Earls, I don't think you're going to be overly bothered unless you're best pals with Larmour and you're going to feel for him. But you're going to even get over that pretty quickly. You know, I suppose I've used the analogy in the past of, you know, my own disappointment when I didn't get picked for the Lions tour. You know, I knew that the likes of Johnny and the boys were sorry for me, but they got over it very quickly because they're playing a test match themselves. And that's the reality of it. You're going to have some people come out of a team announcement that are going to be absolutely buzzing and some guys that are going to be sad. You'll have a quiet word in you know, in the 50-50 decisions. If you get it or you lose it, you'll be humble and say it to the other person. But then it's all forgotten and everyone moves on with their emotions. If you're not selected, you've got to hang on to them for a lot longer and use them in a positive manner the next time you get to play for your club or next time you do get to pull on the green jersey, to make sure that you make that selection all the harder for the coach. But I do think that players aren't going to kind of meet tonight and question the selections when they're that close. I don't think that's something, or you know, why isn't Jordan being picked because he's going to be there at the World Cup? This is about beating Scotland. It's about trying to continue to improve their performance and continue to improve their attack game, and ultimately, you know, try and finish as high on this table as you possibly can, and help the coach out and getting a bit of breathing room from those sharpening knives. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. A reminder for everybody, of course, Rugby and Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish Rugby team of us, everyone in. Let's talk a little bit about Scotland, because we've had loads of Scots on over the course of the week, and while they're a little bit kind of, okay, you guys always beat us, but this is the time. Our team is much better now. You know, we really should have beaten Wales, a bit like us. Are there clear signs? Are the signs as clear as the Scottish rugby people seem to think they are, that the team is getting better?
I think they are getting better. I really do. For the first time in a long time, I would have more concerns about us travelling over to Murrayfield. You're right. I've listened to a lot of the podcasts this week, and to be honest with you, I don't know if there's anything that hasn't been said about Scotland. There's been so many different voices, but something I suppose I want to reiterate over some words talked about. They're two big players for them in my eyes, two backs. Their captain Stuart Hogg and their out half in Finn Russell. Finn Russell's a really strange one because he still makes me nervous. I'm excited watching him and I look forward to watching him and I know that I'm going to be entertained. But you know, with your outside half, the tens, a lot of the tens I played with were kind of narky, took themselves very seriously, were very annoyed when they made an error, and he's the antithesis of that.
Who are you talking about?
But even the likes of, you know, even Johnny Wilkinson, even Stephen Jones, these guys took themselves very seriously, and if there was an error made, they weren't laughing it off. Like, he got sin binned against England, and the first thing the camera shoots to him, he's got kind of a grin on his face, and I know that that's his personality, and we all work differently, but I want a bit of anger and I want a bit of angst from my 10, and someone that's going to boss things and going to minimize the mistakes. He has made big mistakes at big moments. You think about the Champions Cup final, throwing that intercept when it was unnecessary, but then at the same time, you think about the pass he threw to Hugh Jones a couple of years ago against England, where no one would visually have the ability to throw that pass and see where the space was when the English winger played in. Was it Johnny May? And all of a sudden he threw this 20-meter pass. Like those magic moments is why we watch them. But I would be so nervous as a Scottish supporter, in the same breath as being excited watching him, because he has the capabilities of a brain fart still. And I suppose that's a good thing and a bad thing from an Irish perspective, because I do think he can park those moments pretty quickly. But the issue is when you have them at the end of the game and they can cost your team, potentially.
Should he be on the Lions tour?
He should. Listen, he's still. I heard Andy Nichols say he's the complete number 10. I don't know if I would agree with that. I think he's close to being the complete number 10, but he still has those aberrations where, you know, there's just something amiss, or there's one piece of the jigsaw just not quite fitting in. But yes, it's good enough to be a Lions player, good enough to push for a test match. But when push comes to shove, is he the guy that you want kicking, you know, your winning goals? I don't know what his percentage is, but he's prone to still the odd bad miss. And then, you know, does he have the controlling capabilities to win a chess match in a test series in the Lions tour against South Africa, of all teams that sometimes you just have to, you know, be smart and play your way around and be a bit pragmatic. So I don't know, but you know, he should be on a Lions tour because he still is box office and he's still going to create an awful lot of excitement, and that's what we want in the game as well. Yeah. We don't want bores at 10. We want guys to be able to express themselves and push the boundaries and entertain. I'm not saying we don't want those things. I'd be just a bit nervous if I was a Scottish supporter. Still, there's that little inkling hanging on to me.
The bit before he gets yellow carded against England, there's several individual brain farts before the actual one that he gets carded for. There's a bit where the ball is back in their 22 and looks like it's all safe and it's in control, and then all of a sudden England have the ball, and as England are at the ruck, he kind of turns around to walk back to get into the line. So he literally kind of has his back to the play for a second. I'm like, in your own 22.
Yeah,
it was just...
He does seem to drift in and out of games a bit too sometimes. Like, he's in the backfield another time in the English game and Farrell gets the ball, and I don't know whether he's kicked it and then stayed in the backfield, but he's to cover a lot of space, but he's not busting a gut to get there. And Farrell has, 30 metres to land the ball where he should only have 15 metres because of Russell working harder earlier. And it's those small little things that just chip away at me that just would serve as a small irritant. With just push it a little bit harder. And again, I know that you're getting that with his personality, but I want that little bit more from my 10. One thing that he will do brilliantly at the weekend, and something that Felipe Contepomi did brilliantly when he was playing out half for Leinster or for the Pumas, is he challenges between the second and the third defender from the ruck when he has a trail runner on his inside. So ordinarily, the third defender will defend against the first ball receiver, and if it's going across any pod of forwards to the first back, so it'll be third defender on first back. So what he does an awful lot of the time is he'll fake to go outside to encourage the third defender to kind of push across in his continued line of running, and then he'll step against the grain and run back at the second defender. which will make a difficult defensive tackle for the 13 to shift his body weight and get back in. But then what he does is he puts decision time in the head of the second defender. Ordinarily in a system, his man should be the trail runner. He should leave the outside half, the first receiver, to the third defender. But now all of a sudden he's in trouble. So he uses that inside runner, almost plays with them in identifying whether the second defender is going to stick on him or he's going to stick on his own man. And that's where you see so often he'll show it inside. The second defender will stick on the trail runner and he'll go through a gap or he'll make a half break. And that's where they start flooding the line. He did it brilliantly against Wales once or twice, and he will guaranteed in bad conditions to do it against us, particularly when he has Van der Merwe coming off the wing, who's such a huge threat, and you're going to have to give a lot of focus to him. But he's smart at the personnel that he uses to manipulate the defence, to create an opportunity for himself, a half gap, and then offload in behind, and then it's heads up rugby.
So we're really looking for people watching this game on Sunday for the 12 and 13, for Ringrose and Henshaw to be very much not getting sucked into that decoy and not letting their defensive line break down.
Well, it's not even going to be those boys. What Ringrose and Henshaw will have to do is they'll have to stop the trail runners, get into the passing channel, and make sure that they do run good escort lines. So when when Finn Russell does make the half breaks, that he doesn't have an easy offload. It's more going to be around the pack. He picks and chooses who he bullies, and he'll try and find tight five. He'll try and identify and wait for his opportunity to realise who's the third defender. Is it Tyke Furlong? Is it one of the front five that has worked hard at a scrum, or maybe it's into double phases, and you'll have James Ryan in there, and straight away they'll feel as though they're under pressure from a speed point of view, so they push out a little bit, and then when you're a big unit it's more difficult to turn back in and change that direction, and that's where he'll take advantage of you, and that's where he'll use Maitland, and that's where he'll use Van der Merwe, and he does it so often for Racing, with Teddy Tama on the inside, or Vakatawa sometimes on those trail runners, Imhoff as well, that he just uses them as bait, and then he goes through himself, and then that's when they know to flood. And once you're in behind, if he makes a break, the likelihood is they're going to find a way to score the try, be it through another pass, or he's been known to score them himself plenty of times. So it's something to just keep an eye out for, because he will definitely threaten that at the line this weekend.
Let's talk about Stuart Hogg, because Hogg's relationship with Ireland obviously drops the ball over the line. Gives that interview after the game in the Autumn Nations Cup, where he was like, oh yeah, look, things are definitely going in the right direction, just after we'd hockeyed them, which precipitated Eddie O'Sullivan going off on Scotland are absolutely rubbish rant, which this week we found out from one of our guests that Hogg is aware of this because it came up on a BBC podcast. So fair play to Eddie O'Sullivan. Nothing like trolling your opponents during the Six Nations. That always works out well.
I did listen to it again when you had Johnny Beattie on the show, be it yesterday with Johnny Murphy, and it was funny listening. And Johnny Beattie was right. There's truth in it, but I think we got the kind of vitriolic Eddie around how much obviously it has clearly annoyed him. Hasn't annoyed me so much. I think when you get Scotland, there has been a lot of bluster for years, and they haven't been able to back it up. But my concern would be, I feel as though they can back it up this time, and that if we do treat them and do expect to go over there and win, and show a lot of confidence going into the performance on the back of a result against Italy, I think we have the ability to come off second best, no doubt at all. I think they're a much improved drill team. I think they've got a far meatier pack, even though they're missing one or two. I think if you look at the Lion potential from who's going to come out of their pack, I think you're definitely looking at the likes of Watson and Ritchie as flankers. They both could be Lions. Johnny Gray will be a Lion. And then you're looking at, Rory Sutherland has definitely potential to be a Lion. So straight away, you're picking four potential Lions tourists. Have we got four in our pack? I don't know if you could be as confident in saying that. So definitely there's a meatiness to their pack. And I think they've got better X-factor players in Finn Russell and Stuart Hogg that can create something from nothing. I think Stuart Hogg is in the form of his life. He's at peak physical condition, 28 years of age, lots of experience, captain of the team now, has some trophies under his belt, having won the double with Exeter last year. And he looks fit, strong. He looks like a really difficult player to understand what he's going to do from a teammate point of view, but also from an opposition point of view. If there's a World 15 right now, I think Stuart Hogg is your 15 for sure. And it's just the way that he's, what he does with the ball in two hands. He almost mesmerizes the defense. You have to remember too, with the ball in two hands, yes, that's what coaches or underage coaches will always tell you, to try to be able to pass the ball. But it's much easier to generate any momentum with arm swing when you've got it stuck under one arm. So the fact that he's doing it with two hands, he's having to generate it, extra emphasis from his hitch kicks and from his sidestepping, and you'll see him this little cock of the ball that almost is a trigger for him to explode and getting his fast twitch fibers firing. And I was trying to see whether he has a favoured left or right foot, and I don't think he does. And he steps off one and then the other, and then he has his hitch kick, and then he's gone. And I don't know how many defenders he's beaten in this year's Six Nations, but it's almost double the next person, from memory. So he's so good to watch, and he's oozing with confidence. And you saw that one-on-one against, was it Watkin in the Welsh game? Like, he's just eating people up in those situations. You've got to double team him, and you've got to defend tightly, and yet he's still able to get the ball away and create space for others. So. If you're going to stop Scotland at the weekend, you've got to at least get parity and probably try and get the better of their pack, and you've got to stop Finn Russell and Stuart Hogg playing. That sounds very obvious, but it's there. If you can nullify all of that, I think Ireland will win.
It sounds pretty ominous, because that's all quite difficult to do, and yet Wales managed it. Now, Wales did manage it with the benefit of an extra man on the field, and we know they're the best team in the world when they have an extra man. So what should we learn from that Wales game?
Well, I think if you look at two of Wales's tries, they came from the line-out maul. They absolutely ate them up. I'm trying to think the timeline on them. Both of them, I think, came after the red card. The Wyn Jones one was a straight line-out maul from 12 metres out, I'd say. But the Liam Williams try, the one that led up to that, again, they must have mauled them for 8, 9, 10 metres. And the thing was, they used the ball, Wales used the ball on the front foot. So often what happens with teams is they try and get every last centimetre out of the maul, and when it becomes static, and it's an opportunity for the defence to set and not be on their back foot, versus trying to get the ball from the maul while the team is still going forward and the opposition are backpedaling. And so you don't get line speed, you don't get the same sort of impact at collision zone, because they're off balance and they're not quite set. So all of these things have a positive knock-on effect to being able to get some width on teams and create space out wide, which Wales managed to do. Scotland didn't do a huge amount wrong in that Liam Williams try, except Graham, I think, probably should have hit in at the end the way the rest of the team did. But so those two, there is an area that definitely they'll have worked on, because they conceded 2 tries, and it's something that Ireland are pretty good at and have been for a long time. And
seem to have got a little bit better at and using it a bit more. Maybe it's just the perception. Maybe we've been told that Paul O'Connell is involved in the team. We're like, that's clearly what Paul O'Connell's doing.
But I listen, there's no doubt about set piece that we have improved at set piece, whatever about our own, but the opposition as well. I think we've been a nuisance. And if you can stop first phase at source and make a nuisance of it, particularly teams that really like to have a cut-off first phase and have the capability to do it, if you can stop that and get your defence organised thereafter. And I do think that first phase is where you're most vulnerable, particularly off scrum. If you can negate that and get into phase defence, it's miles easier to be able to defend thereafter if you're well organised and you know what your system is trying to deliver. So yeah, I do feel as though Paul O'Connell's brought an awful lot to the line outside of things. I think John Fogarty's doing a good job at scrum. I think we've been good in the scrum so far. But also the big thing about Paul O'Connell and something that that excites him is the quality of ruck ball and bringing some of the terminology from Joe Schmidt back into things about the left and right barrel and the safety, in behind to secure the rucks, to make sure that we're not burning numbers at ruck time. At times in last year, we were sending 4, 5, 6 to rucks at times, and all of a sudden you got to kick the ball because you run out of numbers when the opposition has one defender in that ruck. So I think it's just a bit more accuracy with the personnel that are going to rucks, but also kind of having an enthusiasm for it again. It's very hard to get enthusiastic about something that you don't practice an awful lot and the expectation is just to deliver. You have to sometimes even simulate that at training to make sure you're constantly talking, you're constantly reinforcing it, and it almost becomes second nature when you go out there. And the knock-on effect is quicker ruck ball, more space, and that's why we were able to deliver against Italy, albeit Italy have lost 30 on the bounce in the Six Nations. So let's not get overly excited. We should judge ourselves more so on the performance the next 2 weekends than on Italy. Good confidence builder, but I think we can park it after that.
One last question on Stuart Hogg before I ask you about what you think is going to happen in the game. Is it nitpicking to talk about his captaincy, or is he a good captain? Is this just an experience thing that he's going through at the moment?
Well, yeah, I think it sounds like captaincy is not just on the pitch, right? It's captaincy is about leading by example, being having your best players captain in a country like Scotland in particular. I think is inspiring for everyone to raise their game. I think it makes sense, and it's very difficult to have an impact on the game from fullback. The best captains are 4 to 9, because they're in the coal face. The front row have their heads up someone else's backside, and everybody else from 10 out. 10 is to focus on goal kicking more often than not. Centre out is too far out. So when I was captain, I would always have told the captain before or the referee beforehand that Paul O'Connell was pack leader, and that talking about any discipline or anything, speak to him. I don't want to come running in the whole time. It's going to slow the game down. I suppose it's just trying to generate a good relationship. Same with Stuart Hogg. I'd imagine he has a voice in the pack that's trying, or at least I would hope he is, trying to delegate and share some of that workload. But I do think he's missed a couple of opportunities to kick goals. I think Scotland aren't a team that can be brazen yet and have this huge confidence about tapping and going to the corner, because I don't think they've earned the right to do that. I think Six Nations rugby is keep the scoreboard ticking over, and there were 9 obvious points that he gave up against Wales that would have been the difference in winning the game. Now, in one penalty they got done for crossing right on the goal line. They should have scored it, but they didn't. And I think you've got to, when points are there, what was it was 17-8, and they turned down under the sticks. Like, you've got to continue building the score. 3 points in the Six Nations is a lot. As the end result would have dictated in that Welsh game. So it's something that I just feel as though you could get a bit lax on and just feel, we'll get 5 or we'll get 7. The mentality should still be to keep the scoreboard working for you when you've exerted pressure, because the flip to that is when you're not able to deliver points when you've had this huge pressure surge on the opposition, it's a shot in the arm to them when they come out of it unscathed.
The coaching situation in this game is really interesting as well, because obviously Scotland had Vern Cotter, who was doing a good job in building something, and they whipped him out and stuck in Townsend, who obviously is a long-term legend and who had restored a little bit of credibility to one of their Pro 14 sides, which was hugely important to them, and then completely flamed out at the Rugby World Cup. Absolutely the type of performance that in Wales or in Ireland or in England you'd think he would have been sacked, but he was the choice of the head of the Scottish Rugby Union, so it would have been announcing, well, that was my mistake. And we know rugby administrators don't tend to do that type of thing, so lo and behold, they gave him another chance, and he has really improved. In Ireland, obviously, we've got a coach who was around and obviously very important when we also had a bit of a flame out at the Rugby World Cup, but the pressure seems to be far more intense on Farrell at the moment than it is on Townsend, and therefore I would say it's a much more important game. It's obviously a hugely important game for both sides, but Townsend's still going to be there come the next World Cup, almost no matter what at this stage. Andy Farrell needs to get a few wins, ideally 2.
Yeah, look at the trajectory of those two teams though in the last 5 years. Like Scotland have I think, do I see something that where they finished once above Ireland in the Six Nations in the last 20 years. So Ireland have, historically, particularly under Joe Schmidt, have been winning championships. Be in touch on the last day for winning championships, versus Scotland that have been trying, beating Italy, but then succumbing to most of the other sides more often than not, and that's the reality of where they've been. So, a coach like Andy Farrell, a little bit of a poison chalice, albeit it was a little bit easier with what happened in the World Cup, taking over from Joe Schmidt. That the standards and the expectations dipped a little bit. But from Gregor Townsend's point of view, yes, they failed at the World Cup, but maybe there was enough in what they were doing with the players they had that the Scottish Union felt, you know what, maybe we just stick at this, because what's the alternative? And Gregor Townsend clearly is a very good thinker of the game. Not always the best coaches are the best players, the best coaches, but he thinks the game out very well. He's got an out half to very much his own style, and now he's got some quality players coming through that are genuine contenders for the British and Irish Lions. If you're a Scottish supporter, it must have been hard viewing supporting the Lions for the last 12 or 16 years. They've been non-existent. So all of a sudden now you've got players of that caliber as a collective, and all of that is going to start pushing towards that we've got them in the group stages of the World Cup. They're gonna get progressively better and improve on the standards they've shown over the course of the last 6 or 9 months. But yet they're not far away from falling away with their strength and depth, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. That's where I think we've really come on leaps and bounds in previous years, where the strength and depth of our 35, 40-man squad is more impressive than the likes of theirs.
Are we going to win?
I don't know. I really don't know. Like I think we'll be really up against it. I think my gut during the week was it'll be a one-score game and maybe Scotland might edge it. And so it's a bit of a toss of a coin. I just for the sake of it, not for the sake of it, because I do feel as though they've got the bit between the teeth. I think we might get a Scotland victory, because I do feel as though we were very good against a poor Italian team, but things are going to be very different against a defence that pushes hard against you, that shuts down your space, that's super aggressive. I do think, again, the no crowd in Murrayfield will obviously help, because they can play like crazed madmen when the crowd gets on behind them, and particularly when they get the lead in Murrayfield. I think the start is huge. If you start poorly against Scotland, it's such a tough day at the office. But if you can start well and almost break them early on the first 20, 30 minutes and get some scores and get a little bit of a lead, I think things inevitably become much easier for you and play with a bit more comfort. You go behind a score or two to them and you can just see their chests swell, and there's no more difficult team to eke out a victory against than Scotland in Murrayfield when things aren't going well for you and they've got their tails up. Yeah,
I can imagine the crowds, the thronging crowds of men in kilts belching whiskey all over the field is not a great place to be.
No, it's not. It didn't happen many times, thankfully, but when it was bad, it was really bad. And even when Scotland were poor throughout that 15-year period that I played against them more often than not. Early on that we got one hiding in 2001 in Murrayfield, but after that I don't know if we lost again in the Six Nations. But it even when they weren't good, they were still tough, and we still had to grind it out. And there was moments in the Grand Slam game in 2009 when that wasn't a good Scotland team, but we almost went 2 scores behind going in at half time. So they're proud like ourselves, and even though they haven't in the past had the best quality teams, they've still been able to churn out the odd one-off performance, whereas I think now they've got much better players. There's continuity to them, there's understanding what they're trying to achieve, and a bit of confidence, and all of that plugged together just makes them a much more difficult proposition than anything in the last 20 years. And I do feel as though this might be their year to get one better than us. They've got a big chip on their shoulder on what Eddie has been talking about in the past and what Irish people think of them. So they've got to prove us wrong at some point.
Yeah, if anybody wants to get a sense, by the way, of how the Scottish are feeling, you can get that all on the OTB Sports app on our podcast network. Across the week, we heard from ex-Scotland internationals Rory Lawson. He was on OTB AM. Andy Nicholl, as Brian said, was on Wednesday Night Rugby. And then yesterday on the Six Nations show, we had former Scotland back rower Johnny Beattie. He was alongside Johnny Murphy. He was saying how Ireland look a little bit looser and a little bit slower these days, particularly in the back line. So hopefully that's something for the Irish squad to digest ahead of kickoff. And you can watch the Six Nations show every Thursday at 12:30. If you missed it, you can watch it back now on our app, or you can get it at youtube.com/off the ball. I did want to just ask you about the CVC deal. This deal has been rumbling on for, I would say, the best part of 4.5, 5 years at this point, since it was first mooted. And just before the pandemic, it looked like it was about to be done. And now, as it looks like we're about to, fingers crossed, come out of the pandemic, the deal has been done. If you're CVC, when you're trying to buy an asset and all of a sudden the asset gets massively devalued because, or maybe not devalued, but certainly when the people who are selling it to you are suddenly desperate for cash, they must have been pretty happy with how things worked out.
I don't think the asset's devalued at all. I think the issue is obviously the struggles that the unions have all been dealt with the pandemic. When you look at the losses, with our own union, I think the RFU lost 140 million last year, expected to lose between 40 and 50 million this year. Rugby depends on bums on seats, like no other sport. So. It's the landscape has changed dramatically for the necessity for these funds. Previously, it was about bringing CVC in and growing the game, and obviously they felt there was huge scope to digitize things, reach it to a younger audience who have a different kind of attitude towards digestion of games and content. Whereas now from the and that was an opportunity for the unions to plug some of those funds into grassroots, into the development of the game. Now those funds are going into survival, into going to outgoings. Listen to Philip Brown talking about that 7 million that's going to come in this year will only last for a number of months because of the shortfall. If you're CVC, there's no better time for them to be in the game because they've got they're like a seventh partner in the Six Nations. But before long, those monies are going to be gone if this pandemic continues. We don't get crowds in, and they'll be coming in for a second bite, and all of a sudden they'll be, a quarter operator of a Six Nations setup. So it does feel as though, from their perspective, they must be licking their lips because the game hasn't changed over the course of the last year. Just the circumstances have changed, and there's still all that scope that they'll feel to grow the game. But yet the needs of the unions have changed dramatically. So watch this space.
Were you one who was always worried and cautious about this happening, or actually thinking, do you know what, the game could do with a little bit of a shake-up?
A little from column A, a little from column B. I do feel as though they're, having watched what they did with Formula One and what they created and how they were able to build it as a brand, as a sport, and how they were able to monetize it was remarkable. So there's something exciting in that. The flip to it is they're there to make return. They're not there to enhance the game. They're a financial organization. They're VC fund where they want to be able to see return on money, and with that, the values of the game mightn't be as important to them as they are to the respective unions. So you talk about the likelihood or the potential for Six Nations to go behind a paywall. Would that make me nervous? Absolutely, because we're not football. We're not another global sport where 50 countries watch us on a weekly basis. You've got a stronghold of rugby-loving countries, and the reality is, if we start taking the likes of Six Nations away from people that only turn rugby on for Six Nations, they're not going to go to the pay-per-view broadcasters, and it won't be as easy for them to support their team. So it would be a little bit of a concern. again, just listening to what the likes of Philip Brown are saying, that they haven't made an error of the last 20 years as to how much they've let the financial side of things play their hand, but this feels like different territory, and you have to be very careful what does happen. I know cricket had an issue with it, Formula One maybe had an issue with it, with the growth of the sport from a grassroots, from an interest level point of view. I think it's not a mistake that rugby can make, because we're fighting some tricky topics anyway. I don't think you need less viewership, less interest levels, less enthusiasm for the game on top of what's already going on behind the scenes.
So that's definitely one of the negatives. Are there positives to having an outside organisation come in and deal with unions, which have, in fairness, been quite conservative as a group over the years?
Yeah, well, it's for me with CVC. It's not just about Six Nations. They're obviously in the Premiership, the Gallagher Premiership. They're in the Pro 14. They have been in discussions with some other unions. You can be sure that they'll be looking at having a go at Europe. So they're trying to package the whole thing and own a piece of the sport. And obviously, they've identified markets like America, like China, these Olympic, countries that love the Olympics, via sevens or via the 15s game. They do feel there's an opportunity to grow the market and the size of the game in a massive way. So I think you have to, I don't know what their plans are. I'm not privy to understanding what that entails, but you would have to suggest that if they're making an investment like 430 odd million into Six Nations, they expect to make that and some on their return whenever they do exit the game. And so that's not being decided on a whim. They feel as though there's lots of channels for them to upgrade the game. And I do think that will have a positive impact on new eyeballs getting to see the game, on the creation of exciting new content and a different focus from what we're ordinarily used to. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see what transpires. But they're primed in a good position from their perspective, from their investment, I do think.
Brian, good stuff. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Cheers.
Brian O'Driscoll with us there. Rugby and Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.